Hi, my name is Casey Ryan, and I'm honored to be able to turn the tables on Bill O'Donnell, the producer of Spirituality TV for the past 18 years, and also 10 years of producing The Art of Healing in Santa Fe. During that time, Bill has interviewed innumerable people about matters relating to the spirit, Christianity, and holistic concepts of mind and body. As a founding member of the Santa Fe Institute for Spirituality, which celebrated 25 years this past summer, Bill has been very active in the Catholic Church here in Santa Fe. He's interviewed archbishops, bishops, priests, nuns, brothers, Benedictines, Franciscans, Carmelites, and more. I've known Bill since he came to town back in the early 80s. He tells me I cemented the relationship when I invited him very early one fall morning to join me in going to Los Alamos to listen to Krishnamurti speak, an invitation he jumped at.
Right away.
I've known Bill as a spiritual seeker all these years who is firmly rooted in the Catholic tradition. He's had an open mind about matters of the spirit, some of which we'll talk about today. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Casey.
You've been producing Spirituality TV for the past 18 years or so.
Yeah.
From the shows I've seen, it seems to me that while your audience has spent a great deal of time with you over the years, they probably don't know much about you. And because you're always the one asking the questions. So I know you grew up in the Bay Area in the 50s and 60s. What was that like being an Irish American Catholic?
Well, you didn't know. Anyhow, it's a pleasure to be here on this show at the other seat. It's a new experience for me to be over here and talking about me. But anyhow, growing up in the Bay Area in those days, you weren't thinking about it. I mean, the one thing you were pretty clear was I was part of a family. I had two older brothers when I arrived on the scene, so I became like one of the pack right away. And then shortly 2 years later, my sister Nancy came, and then my younger brother Tom. My oldest brothers are Dick and Jim. And so we had a pretty normal, in those days, what we'd call Leave It to Beaver, or kind of normalcy of growing up in the 50s, so that I remember going. My first school experience was a nursery school, and that was secular. And then they sent me to St. Basil the Great elementary school in Vallejo, California, is what we called it. But since I've moved to New Mexico, I know it's pronounced Vallejo, named after Generalissimo Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo, the last Governor General of Alta California, very famous in California history, and in the north of the San Francisco Bay. My father's father came to that town to become the master boilermaker on what was then Mare Island Naval Shipyard, the oldest naval installation on the West Coast going back from the mid-1800s. And he was from San Francisco, and his father was the immigrant from Ireland after the potato famine, I guess, and missed the gold rush and ended up having a bunch of kids in San Francisco, and my grandfather became the boilermaker, and that's how my family got there. So really the Catholic identity, when you're a little kid, you're just a little kid, you know what I mean? You're still trying to figure out who you are and what's going on. So, but the seeds were planted of Christianity through the Sisters of St. Joseph Carondelet. And I particularly at this time I want to mention one sister who's still alive. She was my fourth, fifth, and seventh grade teacher, Sister Ann Patricia O'Connor, who recently celebrated her 50th anniversary.
Well, you, according to my calculations, you were coming of age about the time of the Haight-Ashbury change in consciousness that was going on in this country.
Yeah. And
being in this San Francisco Bay Area, how were you influenced by that?
Well, my first experience was that I probably was in community college at that point, and I remember a bunch of guys, we were all going to the 49er game at Kezar Stadium in San Francisco, and you have to walk through Golden Gate Park. And we saw these, hippies down there, and a couple of us went down and sat right in the front row to listen to a fellow by the name of Ashley Brilliant, who got famous later for his potshot humor cards, and and he was wonderful sense of humor. I later talked to the guy and bought some of those cards. Little stick figures sometimes of a guy in front of a television saying, "How much more of the present do we have to sit through before the future comes on?" Or little things like that. Very hysterical. But the actual flower power thing had kind of shifted a little bit by then. It was getting a little dark. We had a little incident. The guys from my hometown, most of whom were football players and athletes and jocks, they didn't suffer any fools or anybody trying to mess with them. And I remember one time, a fellow by the name of Ed Hay, if I'm not mistaken, some kind of guy wasn't happy with our presence coming through their scene, literally put his hand on his Bowie knife or whatever you have on here, and Ed went over and just grabbed the knife, broke it in his sheath. The guy was so upset. "I'm going to go get the Hells Angels and get you guys," or something. And we went off to the 49er game and never saw him again. So that's part of the lore, though, of going to San Francisco with flowers in your hair. But I think the bigger influence was really the Vietnam War. And that was a big influence for all that as well.
Well, during the Vietnam War, you became a member of Air America as a steward.
Well, it was later. World Airways, actually, not the famous movie with Robert Downey Jr. and Mel Gibson and the other guys. That was a pretty good movie. But that was later. After I actually, every guy had to face it, unless you were physically unable to go, and they weren't giving 4Fs easily. Most guys, you just knew you were going. You either went right out of high school, unless you went to college, and then you got a 2S deferment, and that was good for 4 years. That you're affected by it because you knew you only had 4 years. None of us ever thought the war would last that long, and so it was a surprise to me when I graduated from college in '69 that I had to face it. So I actually found a spot, an honorable spot, by going in the reserves. I joined the Army Reserves at Fort Baker, which was then underneath the Golden Gate Bridge on the Marin County side, and I'd signed all the contracts and initialed everything. I had a military ID card, and I had a great experience that sent me in the spiritual path. I was sitting in my parents' house at 3:30 in the afternoon, waiting. What do you do the day before you're going to go join the Army? You know what I mean? And a phone call rang. It was the draft board calling. For my first name is John. This is for John. I says, "What's this mean?" He says, "I want you to know you're going to get a 4F, which means I'm physically not having to go in the service at that time because of an old high school basketball injury while I was in high school in my pre-induction or pre-registration health record, and then I injured my foot my senior year in college. And so because of that, they wouldn't take me or didn't want me to go because they're going to pound my feet into the ground anyhow and didn't want me to become disabled because of just preparing for the service. So when she hung up, I didn't know this woman. She didn't know me. She didn't have to call me. I began to believe that an angel had intervened in my life. I said, something happened there. And so it was a great experience for me to reflect on my life in a whole different way.
Well, as was common in the 60s and early 70s, you looked to the East for answers. Mm-hmm. What religions did you explore, and what was the biggest gift you received from those studies?
Well, I was really going away. It started in community college, believe it or not, just taking courses like anthropology and philosophy from, what's that guy's Professor Everett McCartney, and he got me thinking, in a different way. You don't have those courses in high school, so we definitely, that started. Then when I went off to college, going away from home was a great experience. And so all of a sudden I started reading things like Alan Watts had a big influence on me, Zen Buddhism. I even read Dianetics, what's that guy's name? L. Ron Hubbard's books that led to Scientology. But parapsychology also came into my existence. I read and I met a guy there who just died this year, one I want to honor, Professor Jack Holland, who was the founding director of the management department in the School of Business at San Jose State. And Jack kind of handpicked about a half dozen of us to take to his home. We were mostly pledges in the Alpha Tau Omega fraternity, which he was the advisor. And he just kind of intuited who to bring. And we're sitting there at his home when a fellow by the name of a Dr. McKinney, I think he was, a chiropractor, came in and sat down, looked very normal, short hair, short sleeve shirt, tie, and sat down and just closed his eyes. And I had just heard about meditation at this point, so I saw him meditating, and then he began to speak. And I listened to him speak, and then I leaned over to the guy next to me and I said, "It doesn't seem like he's the one that's talking," which is the perfect explanation for what I learned was channeling. And so that was quite an experience. And then I went to Jack later and I said, "Hey Jack, do you have a book you can recommend for me to help me catch up to what's happening here?" And he bought for me the English edition of Morning of the Magician. I think it was called The Dawn of Magic by a couple of scientists by the name of Powles and Berger. And it was an extraordinary book. It was by scientists examining phenomena, including the Chariot of the Gods book that was by Eric von Däniken, was included in that book. And Eric developed that theory and made a bunch of money on his book. But it was really just the phenomena beyond the fringe of the modern newspaper coverage, so to speak. Everything from UFOs to past lives to you name it. I think In Search Of became a series on television narrated by Leonard Nimoy of Star Trek fame, gave a little emphasis to those kinds of things that were covered in parapsychology, and I went on to become co-chairman of the San Jose State Parapsychology Society, and that was a great influence all the way until I didn't have to go in the service that summer. And then I realized God had given me something. I knew God existed after that because I was saved from either going to the Army for 6 years or going to Vietnam. So I was given this gift of freedom to pursue that pursuit.
Well, I know at one point you attended school for psychics, for psychic development. Why were you drawn to that, and what did you learn?
Well, somewhere around that time, my late maternal grandfather, John Spann, we call him Pop, and Pop Spann was a 33rd degree Mason and a wonderful guy. And his brother, my great uncle Bill, I was named for these guys, were Masons, and they had a kind of a spiritual bearing, but it wasn't religious. And so I kind of, I don't know, precociously said to Pop, I said, "Hey Pop, in the future when you go over, meaning when you die, and if it's okay and it won't interfere with our karma, will you contact me?" And he kind of smiled and says, "Okay, well, I will." And never thought anything of it until he died. And then by God, he did. And I was like, I thought I was losing my mind. You know, I was imagining things, which in a way you are. But I could see him like in a silhouette form, his face, and I could hear his voice. And so that was a struggle because you weren't sure if you were losing it or what was really happening. You wanted it to be true, but you never were 100% sure. And so later, interpreting that, I had an opportunity to go. But before that, one of the first things that happened to me, I want to honor Ram Dass, the former Richard Alpert, who was at one time chairman of the clinical psychology department at Harvard, but now known as Ram Dass. And he wrote his first book called Be Here Now, and it told of his transformation. He and Tim Leary discovered psychoactive substances, and as psychologists and the high priests of psychology at Harvard, they went and studied this stuff. And a lot of us were influenced by that in terms of experimentation and learning from altered states of consciousness about a deeper understanding of us as human beings. And so that book got me started. And then, but it was his spiritual path. He went from Jewish to Hindu through the influence of a fellow by the name of Neem Karoli Baba, who was a holy man in India. And he gave him acid, and the guy just sort of twinkled at him. And his comment was, "It's just like Christ to demonstrate himself as a pill to the West," or something like that. But that led him into spirituality and his path to this day as a teacher of many of our generation. And he's still living, and I want to honor him. And then Tim Leary, the other way, who brought it to him in the first place. And he says, I learned more on 8 hours of psilocybin or mushrooms or something, or peyote, than I did in 12 years of psychoanalysis, which is a serious claim for these guys, serious. So I think history will judge these guys in a whole different way once we've had some time around it. But a lot of that was influential, and then led me to Heart Song, which was a spin-off of the Berkeley Psychic Institute, to learn about how to work with the chakras, the energy centers in the body, how to learn how to use your breath to become more conscious and aware of those subtleties around them. And that was the first class I took, beginning reading, and the second one was how to lay on hands and how to run energy or allow energy to come through you for healing.
Similar to Aldous Huxley's books of opening the doors of perception.
Indeed.
So that was the benefit of those times.
And Ralph Metzger, who I've talked to later, wrote the Maps of Consciousness, and he's still out teaching and working.
Well, shortly after coming to Santa Fe, you were compelled to go spend time at the Benedictine Monastery in Pecos. And that was when they were in a very strong charismatic movement.
That's true.
And so what did you glean from that experience?
Well, it's important, I think, to set the stage for it. After I graduated from law school, I went to the University of Pacific's Law School in Sacramento, McGeorge School of Law in '77, and then sat for the bar. I just felt this call. I was in a relationship with someone at the time, and the fourth thing on the list was maybe go to this retreat, to learn more about Siddha Yoga, because I had met him after I met Ram Dass in person.
Siddha Yoga?
Siddha Yoga.
Explain that.
Siddha Yoga is the study of, it was great. It was called the Maha Yoga. It was a great yoga, all through the grace of the Guru. The Guru at the time was Swami Muktananda, who has since passed on and passed his lineage on to Swami Chidvilasananda, who they call Guru Mai. And she continues in that vein. And I took this course in summer '77, teacher training course in Siddha Yoga, which is ironic because I didn't know anything about it, but I signed up to take it. And I had a great experience there, 3 weeks in an ashram in Oakland. And it was a great antidote after, so many years of law school, etc. And it was just a great experience because here was this living out the seeking for God, first chance to really have it, getting out of my formal education at the time and going into the ashram. And then I want to acknowledge, again, going back, was the book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, about Paramahansa Yogananda, because this demonstrated that it really was valuable and worthwhile to be a seeker. That's what he was. And he came to this country in the early 1900s, one of the early teachers and gurus that came over. And it was funny because he dedicated his book to Luther Burbank, who lived in Santa Rosa and grew all these wonderful plants and that sort of thing, and food. And anyhow, it was one of the first books that I read it all the way to the back and immediately went back to the cover and read it again and learned about this Hindu lineage and the rest. And that's what led me to Muktananda. And then when I came back, and I was in the investment banking business in Denver at the time, and where I met the Dalai Lama, ironically, for the first time. And as fate would have it, that company I was with went out of business, and I came down here, and but I was visiting in Boulder, and I was at the Unity Church, and I was praying for guidance, and I realized in my Hindu period that I was too much in my head, and they call that jnana yoga, trying to come to God through your intellect. So I made the conscious decision, knowing nothing about bhakti. It was either that bhakti or karma yoga, which would be service, to become a bhakti, which was more heart-centered. And the truth was, I somehow, through reverse psychology, realized that I needed and wanted more love in my heart, which is the center of bhakti, devotion. And once I did that, something happened spontaneously, supernaturally, through the grace of God. I heard myself say, I'm just meditating, and I heard myself say the mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, which was the mantra that Muktananda taught us. It literally went out of my brow chakra, and off the wall came the highest commandment, which is to love God with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole mind. And I heard myself say it. It was like a tape change or something. It was like they took out the one tape and put in the other, and I realized something had happened. It became my mantra, which was more perfect for being a bhakti. And that really got the ball rolling. And I think that's why then my company went out of business, and I moved to help some friends get something going here that I'd met in psychic school in Berkeley, called the Church of Light and Love, which was an attempt at creating that. And that lasted about 6 months or whatever, but it got me here. And within a year, that's about the time I met you, I think, before I went to the monastery. And then I was with a friend, the late Francis Michael Farrell, and on St. Patrick's Day, 1983, we took a drive over to Pecos and up the Pecos River to an Irish-American party, which I'm sure the Ryan and you will identify from Dublin. Ohio. But so I went up to this party. Turned out to be the most boring Irish-American party I've ever been. I swear those people weren't Irish. But in any case, came back and I drove by. Hey, what's that? And Michael said, that's the Benedictine Monastery. I'd never seen a monastery at this time. I'm in my early 30s. And he was, in his 50s, I think. And so I says, I made a mental note. And so on the way back, I said, let's stick our head in here. So he pulled in and I went in. And I remember seeing then Father Gene, who was there, doing something in the small chapel. I still don't know what he did. And I made a mental note to come back, and that was it. And Spirit has the way of giving you what you want or what you're being called to do. And so I later met former community member there, Teresita Scully, who had been a Carmelite first in Santa Fe, and then when the charismatic renewal happened, she was drawn to be part of that community, the first women who joined the community, so became a men and women Benedictine community, charismatic. And she had come out, and the Lord had led her out, and she was had got her doctorate in natural healing, I think, and had wrote her doctoral dissertation on diet affecting behavior at the state pen after our terrible riot of 1980. You can go to your history books, and that was one of the most devastating riots of any prison in this country. I think 33 people were killed, etc. And so there's a real movement to let's do something about it. She wrote her doctoral dissertation on diet affecting behavior at the state pen. And I had been asked by Claude McDonald, who was then a pastor of the First Christian Church on Weber Street. Remember, I was not back in the church yet. I was still out of the church. And met him through a Course in Miracles workshop that was designed for servicing or serving people who had debilitating diseases, and they had a group, and then the other group for people who were helping them. And I met him, and he says, will you join my group to provide programming for the Department of Corrections under the Community Corrections Act? And I said I would, and so I conceived of this holistic concept. I was very much interested in holistic health. My father was a physician. I grew up doing that and was interested in it, and I'd learned some spiritual healing in Berkeley. Anyhow, make a long story short, I formed something called the Health and Behavior Institute and put in a program to provide this kind of programming. And it wasn't successful, but it kind of hung me out to dry, and Teresita was right in the middle of it. And so Teresita just casually invited me to go with her back to Mass with the late Father Blaise Shower of the old liturgy of Santa Fe. And somehow, just going to Mass with her and with him, these guys were for real. They were, you could tell they were getting off on it. And I had never really gotten off on it, Mass and things before. And so I kind of picked it up through osmosis and came back to the church and started going to Mass with them. And the next thing I know, I found myself in Pecos, and I heard something was going on, and I think it turned out to be the ordination to the transitional diaconates. When guys are going to become priests, they ordain them as deacons first, sort of informally, but it gives them the sacrament of holy orders. And that lasts for 6 months to a couple of years before they're ordained as priests. And I just begged my way in to see later Father Mike Butler and Father Paul Meaden become transitional deacons. And it was Archbishop Sanchez was doing it, and his assistant at the time was then Father Jerome Martinez, who's now Monsignor Jerome from the cathedral. And it was an incredible experience to be in this exciting, loving community of men and women. I stayed for dinner and stuff, and I knew I wanted to come back. Well, unbeknownst to me, our program wasn't successful with the legislature, and Teresita got it, and she just sent me out there and says, I've arranged for you with Abbot David to go out on retreat. I had nothing better to do at this point, didn't know what I was doing now, and sent me out. And this was 1984, the day before Valentine's Day, and the next day was Mass. In the middle of Mass on Valentine's Day, 1984, I got slammed. Something, the little Mass, I remember the song in the background, be not afraid, I go before you always, come follow me, and I will give you peace. I felt an insertion right in my solar plexus around third chakra, came up like this, kind of choked me a little bit, got to my eyes, my tear ducts just opened, power flood of tears, boom, up to the top of my head, started to shake. Man, I mean, it was like somebody plugged a 220 in my 110 system. It was a serious jolt. And I couldn't even hardly get to communion until the very end. And so I got up and went, and now I'm in shock. I'm in a state of shock. Well, later now I believe is what they call baptized in the Holy Spirit, because it was physical. Maybe I was just a tough guy or something. I needed to be shaken. It only shook me to the tip of my toes. And so anyhow, I stayed later and stuck around, and the end of that weekend was a retreat on holistic spirituality. Never heard of anything like that. And it was the abbot doing it. And I had just done a holistic health program for the Department of Corrections that wasn't successful. Anyhow, that was it. And then Abbot David took me in. He says, I talked to him later, and I says, David, I don't know what happened. And he says, well, what do you think? I said, that's it. I don't have a thought in my head. And he asked me a prophetic question. He said, well, what's the Spirit guiding you to do? Made me question it. So I sat down and just closed my eyes like a good meditator. Within seconds, I heard an audible voice clairaudiently saying, stay. So I opened my eyes and said, stay. And he says, he was enough of a mystic to get it, and said, okay, go get your gear. And that's my beginning of my monastic career.
Okay, well, we're running out of time here, unfortunately. But you've devoted the last 25 years of your life to the Santa Fe Institute for Spirituality. And why has this been so important to you?
Well, a year later, I was sent out. I didn't ask to leave, and they sent me out. And I met Brother Brian through Teresita, and he was starting this thing. And so I volunteered. And it was like a slice of seminary during the summers, and it was all the teachings I never got. You know, my formal education as a Catholic ended at the 8th grade, so it was catch as catch can, and I was hungry. And I started to read this book when I was in the monastery. I went to my friend Randy Bankston, who wasn't a Catholic, but he was a postulate there, and I says, hey, Randy, I'm feeling insecure about being this rookie monk here, and I don't know anything. He says, well, you might want to consider reading the Bible. And I just started laughing. Yeah, that's a good idea. And so I picked it up. I've been reading it ever since.
Well, with the enthusiasm you have for matters of the Spirit, we could be sitting here for hours. But our time's already up for this edition. And I'd just like to let people know out there that there is the Santa Fe Institute for Spirituality website. It's sfis.org, where we've archived many of the interviews that Bill has done over the years with the priests and bishops and the Illuminati of the Catholic religion and other spiritual endeavors as well. And so we invite you to go to sfis.org, where you can see some of these videos that Bill has done over the years. We believe that they're timely in that they speak to matters of truth and of the Spirit. And with that in mind, you can catch up on what Bill's been doing there. And so just briefly, what do you see yourself doing for the next 20 years?
Well, I hope you and I are working together on Spirituality TV, and hopefully you'll be able to click on that on their toolbar or the bar. You'll see Spirituality TV, and there'll be other programming in addition to those Catholic interviews. But we've already started. They're airing now currently the Year of the Priest, all priest interviews. Franciscans have their own show, and the Benedictines will have one, Christian Brothers. So we'll try to get some of this out to you so you'll be able to benefit from some of the wonderful teachings we've had with other people. It's been a blessing for me. I mean, why I do it, I mean, you were here, we just did a program this morning, and then our guest, Sister Mary Catherine, she was Illuminati, wasn't she?
Yeah. She was excellent.
All right.
Well, thank you, Bill, and I'm sure that people now have a better understanding of who you are and why you've been drawn to host this program all these years. And we look forward to seeing you do more interviews.
If you didn't like it, blame him. It was his idea. Thanks.
Thank you.